Let's look at human brain, a very powerful part of our body, the most powerful one, and there is a debate between scientists whether brain belongs to our body or other way around, body belongs to brain. This is a very mysterious part of our brain because despite of numerous scientific researches, there is still a lot to do about the brain because there are still a lot of uncovered mysteries about this very powerful organ that is responsible for all the areas of our life, really. We are ruled by our brain. And on this picture, I would like you to look at the way we divided this brain metaphorically into three parts. So the first one, which is marked in red, is called reptilian brain. Reptilian brain is something that belongs to all the animals in a way because this is the ancient brain, and this is the part of the brain where all the instincts are stored, the instinct of survival. This is the ancient programs that rule our life, because even though we are not living in the conditions of wild nature anymore and surrounded by ferocious animals, we still run by the programs that are stored in this brain, in this part of the brain that was ruling the lives of our ancestors. And here, very important instinct, fight or flight response, how we respond to the danger, outside danger, in order to save our life. So when we experience danger, we either fight for our life or we flight or run in order to save our life. When there is no opportunity to run or to fight, we freeze, we pretend to be dead. That is another way of dealing with danger and another way to save your life. And a modern person obviously uses this part of brain as well, and that's how we react to stressful situations. And if we're not able to control this part of the brain, then these emotions, they get trapped in our body and they can actually have quite detrimental effect on different areas of our life. So this is reptilian brain. Then the next part in the hierarchical order of the brain goes limbic brain, and it's marked in blue on the picture. Limbic brain, limbic part of the brain is where our emotions are stored, centers that are responsible for how we emotionally react to that or another situation. You can see that human being has few basic emotions. However, our emotional response is not limited to these basic emotions, but whatever we experience outside of this basic polite is a mixture of these basic emotions. So if you look at these basic emotions, we have fear, we have anger, we have disgust, sadness, contempt, joy, surprise, and interest. Bear in mind that the way these emotional centers are located in our limbic part of the brain is starting from fear and starting from negative emotions in a way, and they're located closer to our reptilian ancient brain because these emotions, they help us to save our lives. They're survival mode emotions, and anything that goes to more positive way, like say joy or surprise or interest, that goes closer to our clever brain, our neocortex part of the brain. So in order to experience negative emotions, you don't need to put that much effort because they're there for you. They're like natural instinctual reactions to these situations. But in order to experience positive emotions, that's when intellectual ability is required. And our final part of the brain that actually defines us as human beings, as Homo sapiens, so basically the highest in that animal world hierarchical system, is neocortex. Neocortex is that part of the brain that has logic, that has critical thinking, that has conscious mind, that basically defines us as humans, that allows us to make decisions, to differentiate different information, filter it, use our critical thinking to choose what is good, what is bad, to obviously define who we are, because this part of the brain it's our consciousness. That's our basically definition that we can control in a way that makes us aware who we are, what our name is, where we're from, how old we are, and so on. So this is that part of the brain that is responsible for our personality and for our thinking process. Here I would like to draw a differentiation between conscious, subconscious, and unconscious, because a lot of people get confused. And it's very important to understand the meaning of these terms, especially for the purpose of our course. So if you look at the picture on your left-hand side, the picture of the iceberg, we can compare our consciousness and our subconsciousness to the picture of the iceberg, metaphorically. So consciousness would be something that is seen, and it's not in a big quantity, because our consciousness only constitutes 5 to 10% of the whole brain volume. And exactly as on the picture, only tip of the iceberg can be seen. And consciousness is something that we can control, something that we remember, in other words, something that we consciously realize what's happening, what is our name, where we are now, what we are doing, what we are saying. We can control it. Consciousness can also control the processes that happen in our subconsciousness to a specific level, because the rest of the brain, 90% of the brain, constitutes the invisible part of the iceberg, something that is behind our consciousness. And in some cases, we can't control it at all. So, for example, if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you can see the picture of the brain, and you see that conscious, subconscious, and there is another term, unconscious, added to this picture. So, quite often people confuse subconscious and unconscious. And rightly so, because more or less it's kind of like the same thing. It's basically that invisible part of the iceberg that constitutes the biggest volume of our brain. But the difference between these two is that unconscious is more about controlling the reflexes, the function of our body on a physical level. So it's kind of, if you compare our brain to the computer, computer would have a hard disk where, more like a physical, technical functionality of the computer is stored, right? The size of the memory, all these technical things, processor, and so on. So it's kind of similar in our system, because, for example, the reflexes of breathing, the reflexes of eye movement, or intellectual abilities, or how our muscles work, they are stored in this part of the brain. And even when we're asleep, this part of the brain is functioning. So it can be quite confusing, but subconsciousness is more like a software of the brain, more like an intellectual part of the brain rather than physical part of the brain. And the same if we compare with computer, right? So computer has hardware and software. So subconsciousness, it's more like a software of the computer. unconsciousness is more like a hardware of the computer. So subconsciousness constitutes 50% of our brain volume and our brain activity, and that's something that in most cases we cannot control, because these are the invisible programs that run inside our mind, and they affect our system of belief, they affect our perception of this world, of different triggers that we experience, of different attitude to specific, situations. Sometimes we might get angry, triggered by some event, and we don't know why it happens, but this specific event triggers anger in us. And if, for example, we dig deeper in our subconscious mind, we might find that there was event when you were a child and you experienced it and you couldn't express your emotions, and they transferred into anger, and that's why anything that is similar to that triggers that. So it works like a program, and in most cases it can work as a mind virus. So any negative reaction to some events that you can't explain why you're reacting like this is based on those mind viruses, those misconceptions that live in our subconsciousness. Because once information gets inside our subconsciousness, it just starts working like a program. It doesn't differentiate between right or wrong, between good or bad, between correct or incorrect, harmful or beneficial for us. It just works there as a program. And only consciousness, that those 10% of our brain can, when we receive program, can filter, can say, oh, this information is not good for me, I'm not gonna take it, or this information I will take it because it's beneficial for me. But sometimes consciousness might not be able to differentiate this information, because we already mentioned, if your mind in that altered state under the influence of emotions or alcohol or drugs or tiredness or shock, or people just generally, or phrases or constructions of the language use that we're going to look at, they can basically they can get into your subconsciousness without being critically filtered, critically assessed. So metaphorically, imagine that your brain is like a very large, say, garden, right, surrounded by gates. And in order to enter this garden, you need to pass through security. You need to pass through the guard that stays or sits at the entry to these gates. And this guard is our consciousness, conscious mind. So this guard very carefully selects information that enters those gates. And we are surrounded by tons of information, right? So, for example, if, say, someone comes up to you in the middle of the street and tells you to do something, say, something really crazy, like says, okay, take off your clothes, for example, right? And you are in your reasonable, conscious state of mind, you are sober, you know what's going on, you would say, no way, just, you will refuse this information. You will be able to critically assess this information and think, oh, somebody is really crazy asking me for things that are impossible to do. I mean, they're possible, but I'm not going to do it because this is not right, right? But imagine if, say, you are at the party, you're having a great time with your friends, and you add a bit of alcohol, and everybody's happy, everybody's having fun, and suddenly there is a game, and you're all drunk, and you're all going into crazy things, and then you start to play games on, say, taking off your clothes. Whoever loses takes off their clothes, and you suddenly, in that altered state of mind, when you receive this information as a part of the game, right? And you don't look at it critically, you're just having fun, and you might even take these orders and you take off your clothes. The question is, next day when you wake up with a headache, with a hangover, and your conscious mind back to its normal, and your God, remembering what happened to you last night, starts to obviously shame you and embarrass you, and you just don't want to kind of think about it, and you would say, oh, that wasn't me. I don't know who it was, but it wasn't me. And that's what basically happening to our brain. So when information comes to the gates of this consciousness, right, that is only 5 to 10%, and God sits there evaluating this information and filters it and chooses whether this information will be allowed to go further to your subconsciousness and stay there and operate as a program inside, or whether this information will be rejected. However, if God is asleep or under the influence, maybe toxic influence, maybe emotional influence, maybe tiredness, then obviously this information that can be even dangerous, even harmful information, can easily get inside your subconsciousness and can easily start operating there as a normal program, causing you a lot of damage. The most dangerous thing about this information is when we receive this influence through wrapped up forms, like, say, fairy tales, stories, different types of legends, like conversations, films, songs, poems, literature. So they're not direct, it's not a direct information, it's information that comes towards our subconsciousness in the form of some kind of story, for example, or song, with some meaning inside those words. And this is quite dangerous because our consciousness doesn't really differentiate whether it will be harmful for us or not. That's why I always say that these fairy tales or cartoons that children watch, and child would have obviously subconsciousness, those gates are quite open, and the child's conscious mind won't be that actively reacting to the information the child receives, right? So these fairy tales, these storybooks, these cartoons, these bedtime stories, they're very dangerous because they're really strong programs, and quite often we build our life based on that information that we received while listening to our bedtime stories, believe it or not, because we write the script, we kind of form the perception of the world based on that information that we receive as children. So this is just something to kind of understand, and I hope it's not too complicated for you. I hope I obviously try to explain really, really complicated information in a more kind of visual and in a more kind of metaphorical way, so you would understand what's really happening to our conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind, how our mind can be easily manipulated, influenced, influenced, forced to do something, or convinced to do something that we might not even realize that it's against our wish or our will, or is something that lives inside our subconsciousness, pretends to be like a normal program, lives like a virus there, and just causes us harm. Because, for example, you might look at specific, say, people or events, and they trigger specific emotions in you, specific reactions in you, even negative reactions, right? And you don't understand why it's happening. Or maybe what people say to you triggers some issues with your self-esteem, because when you were a child or when you were a teenager, somebody said something in a heat of conversation, or maybe as a joke, or maybe as a story, and you perceived it, absorbed it, put it in your subconsciousness and believed in it, and you think that this actually relates to you. And it might be affecting your whole life. So we're gonna look into details how it's all work and what tools are used, and how to locate these harmful programs, and how to reprogram your mind for better life.